You're watching the CV Church Sunday Message, a place to belong, believe, and become. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm Scotty Alvarez. Merry Christmas. Pastor Scott, Kathy, Ben, Kelsey, and Whit send their love. They are in Colonial Williamsburg, Virginia, and it is one place on the planet colder than here, I promise you that. So count your blessings, but they're doing well, and send all of us their love. Well, today we're going to continue with the series that Pastor Scott started 2 weeks ago entitled With. And in this series, we've learned how God is with us and for us, and how to live daily in that reality. So if you missed Pastor Scott's first two teachings in this series, or you want to review, they're available on the CV Church mobile app, and they're also available on the CV Church website under the media tab. So you can catch up there. All the teachings are there going back quite some time. So if you ever want to review, that's the best way to do it. Today we're going to quickly review last week and that teaching about how God is with us. And then this week, we're going to continue today with why God chose to be with us, before closing with a couple of examples of applying these truths in our daily lives. So last week, Pastor Scott taught us, and this is in your handout, in your bulletin, he taught us that Jesus is God with us. That's review point number 1 in your handout. Jesus is God with us. Now, how do I relate to all 4 facets of Jesus? Because Jesus is here to relate to us. He's here to be with us and for us. And we can relate to 4 facets of Jesus as promised by the prophet Isaiah hundreds and hundreds of years before Jesus came. Isaiah wrote this, "For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." How do I relate to all 4 of these facets, that's the next fill-in, of Jesus? Well, I apply the acronym WITH, and this is in your handout also as a review from last week. A, I wait on his supernatural guidance. This is Jesus as our wonderful counselor. He knows exactly what my next steps need to be on a moment-by-moment basis for my life to fulfill the plans and purposes that he has for me, for my relationship for him to be deep, and for that relationship to have the wide impact on others that he's designed it to have. If I submit to him, Jesus supernaturally will guide me and lead me through life. And when that leading guides and leads me into suffering and conflict, as it invariably will, to build my character, to teach me to empathize with others who are hurting, I then B, initiate towards his cosmic power. That's the next fill-in. So I wait on his supernatural guidance as the wonderful counselor that he is, and then I initiate towards his mighty cosmic power. This is Jesus as our mighty God. And when we're in the middle of a battle, he is our victory and our strength. He moves mountains. He heals. He opens doors. He provides. He defends us from our enemies. And he protects us with his strong hands. And in the midst of the battle, when I realize that I've made a mistake, when I've hurt someone, when I've failed in some way, when I've fallen short, I then see, and this is the next fill-in, I trust in his compassionate character. This is Jesus, our everlasting Father, who picks us back up again. He forgives us, encourages us, affirms us. He welcomes us back to him with open arms. This is our good, loving Father. And when the day's battles are over, when I'm regrouping, when I'm resting, when I'm preparing for another day, I then D, humble myself before his unshakable presence. Now this is Jesus, Prince of Peace. He's our rest. He's our solace. He's our ability to stand when we're ready to collapse. He's our quiet in the eye of the storm. As I bow before him, as I humble myself before Jesus, he will always, always, always grant me peace. So in Jesus, God came to live with us as one of us. But why did he do that? That's the question we're going to look at today. Why did Jesus choose to do this? Why did the wonderful Counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, willingly give up these divine privileges to become a human being? The Bible calls it a slave. That's what he became. To join us, his brothers and sisters, in this troubled, tumultuous, torn world. Why did God do that? The answer is found in the book of Hebrews, and we're going to look at the book of Hebrews today. Now, it's a book written in the form of a sermon to Hebrew Christians. Historians date this sermon to within the first generation after Jesus' death. And that makes it, even secular anthropologists and archaeologists will confirm that it's a historically accurate document. Now, we don't know who exactly wrote it, but we do know that the writer was a teacher of equal rank with Timothy, who, if we remember, was Paul's missionary companion. He calls Timothy his brother. We also know that the purpose of this sermon was to encourage Jewish Christians living in Jerusalem to persevere in the face of persecution. So these Christians may have been considering a return to Judaism because of fierce social and physical persecution that they were experiencing at the hands of both Jews and Romans. They were ready to give up. Christ had not yet returned. They were expecting him to come much sooner. And those who had accepted Jesus as the Messiah found themselves influenced by the culture around them, slipping back into old habits, old beliefs. Does that sound like us today? Sure does. The writer of Hebrews is intent on reassuring readers then and now that Jesus is indeed who he claims to be and that he is worth their faith. This is the next fill-in in your notes. And it answers the question, why is God with us? This is point number 2 and where we're going to pick up new for today. Point number 2, God is with us to lead us into glory. To lead us into glory. Hebrews 2:10 says it like this: God, for whom and through whom everything was made, chose to bring many children into glory. And it was only right that he should make Jesus, through his suffering, a perfect leader, fit to bring them into their salvation. Now, a leader is said to be someone who goes first. And that's what Jesus did. Through his Holy Spirit and through his Word, the Bible, he does that on a daily basis. He leads us. He shows us the way back to God. He chose to be with us to lead us back to God. Without Jesus, we cannot be with God. We don't know how to accept God's authority. We don't know how to be obedient to God in the midst of suffering. We don't know how to turn to God for guidance, how to resist temptation. The list of things we cannot do without God goes on and on and on. We could spend all day just listing the things that we can't do without God. We cannot live with God any more now than we could back in the garden. We are too prone to rebellion. So why is God with us? It's to lead us to be obedient to him, to suffer without turning our backs on him, to live and die with a servant attitude, to equip us to rejoin him again. God is with us to lead us back into the glory he designed us for. Now we're going to talk more in a little bit about what glory means in this context, because it's kind of a churchy word. What is glory? And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But first, we're going to look at the 4 distinct ways that God leads us. So last week, there were 4 names that the prophet Isaiah gave to Jesus. And in parallel with that, there are 4 ways now in Hebrews that God leads us, that God goes first to show us the way. The first is this, and this is A in your handout on page 2. He tastes death for us humans. He tastes death for us humans. And what does that mean, taste? Well, it just means it's not permanent, right? Our taste is we eat something and it's gone. That's what he did with death. Hebrews 2:14 says it this way, because God's children are human beings, made of flesh and blood, the Son also became flesh and blood. For only as a human being could he die, and only by dying could he break the power of the devil, who had the power of death. So how does the devil, Satan, the enemy of our souls, how does he hold the power of death? Well, it's because he has the power to seduce us away from God, if we choose to listen to that seduction. When the enemy tempts us to rebel against God, and we choose to follow him, he leads us down a path of permanent death. But to defeat the enemy and to take away his power of death, Jesus had to become human and then trust God so thoroughly that he would willingly go to the grave, knowing and trusting that his Father would never betray him or abandon him. Jesus knows what it is like to die. He knows what it is like to be seduced by the enemy. Jesus can lead us down a path of glory that includes death, burial, and resurrection because he's been there. He's done that. So the first way he leads us is he tastes death for us humans. The second way God leads us into glory is that B, and this is the second in your notes, he frees us from the enemy's traps. Hebrews 2:15 says it this way, only in this way could he set free all who have lived their lives as slaves to the fear of dying. God is with us to give us the opportunity for death to be nothing more than a gateway to new life. We have nothing to fear if we've accepted Christ and we follow his lead, because not even death can defeat when we choose to follow Jesus. So what are you fearing today? Do you fear death, as the writer in Hebrews says? Or do you fear failure? Do you fear change? Do you fear being poor? Do you fear losing your family? Do you fear losing your job, losing a relationship, being insignificant, losing your home, being alone, letting people down, having others think less of you, losing your status? What are you fearing today? I can write a long list of fears. Very acquainted with that. We all experience fear. Fear is often behind our reaction or our overreaction to people, places, things, and situations that in the past have caused us the greatest pain that we don't want to repeat, that we fear repeating. We fear experiencing that pain again. So the writer in this passage in Hebrews tells us that the fear of dying is the greatest fear of all. But there's lots and lots and lots of fears that fall under that heading. Now, much of our anger can be traced back to fear. Fear is the primary trap of the enemy. The enemy traffics in fear. So if you are fearing something today, and most of us are, that is not from God. That has nothing to do with God. If you are experiencing fear, you are experiencing an attack from the enemy. He uses it to try to control us, to imprison us. But because Jesus became human, Jesus also experienced fear. The Bible tells us that very clearly. But he showed us the way to eliminate fear from our lives. He experienced it and he set it aside. How did he do that? How did he free us from the enemy's trap? He allowed the perfect love of Father God to conquer his fear, providing us a way out. So he led us. He led us. God leads us into glory by tasting death for us. He leads us into glory by freeing us from the enemy's traps, fear being first and foremost of those. And then C, he suffers our just consequences. Hebrews 2:16-17 says it like this. We also know that the Son did not come to help angels. He came to help the descendants of Abraham. That's us. Therefore, it was necessary for him to be made in every respect like us, his brothers and sisters, so that he could be our merciful and faithful high priest before God. Then he could offer a sacrifice that would take away the sins of the people. Now, the Christian Jews, hearing this, they would have understood what the teacher was saying. Because in Judaism, in the tradition that they were raised in, the high priest removed the sins of the people through this elaborate system of animal sacrifices. That was how they were made right before God. So then Jesus became a human high priest. That's what the passage said. He became a human high priest for each of us, for us collectively, by offering himself as the sacrifice that once and for all forgave all of the ways our own actions and thoughts have separated us from God. Jesus eliminated the need for the animal sacrifices to continue. He himself had the power to forgive sins. And that was such a powerful thing that alone, when he said that, I have the power to forgive sins. The religious leaders of the day said, blasphemy, you need to be murdered for that. That was how powerful that declaration was. So Jesus paid our penalty before a just God, because in a just God's presence, that there can be nothing that separates from God in God's presence. There can be no sin in God's presence. So Jesus reconciles that relationship, giving us access to a relationship with our Father forever. But Jesus goes one step further than that. He goes one step further than simply giving us a pathway to forgiveness when we miss the mark. What's the saying? It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Okay? Well, God gives us both. He gives us both forgiveness and permission. Here's how, and this is D in your handout. He helps us when we're tested. He helps us when we're tested. Hebrews 2:18 says this, since he himself has gone through suffering and testing, he is able to help us when we're being tested. So if my car had a flat, right, and I saw a tow truck come by and I waved him down, why would I do that? Why would I be so bold as opposed to just waving down another car? Because I have confidence that the guy driving the tow truck knows how to fix a flat. Why? Because he's been there. He has that experience. That's what this passage is saying. Since Jesus himself has had the experience of going through suffering and testing, he's able to help us when we're tested. So Jesus suffered through his testing, but he never turned his back on the Father. He never needed to ask for forgiveness later because he navigated it in real time. He never strayed from his mission. If we turn to him during our suffering and testing, he will lead us through it stronger, more mature, tested, battle-proven. God is with us so that we don't miss the mark in the first place. so that we don't need to ask for forgiveness later. Now, when we need it, which of course we're going to, he is more than happy to provide it. But his goal is to teach us wisdom so we can navigate that minefield without setting off any mines. He leads us to complete our mission. He helps us navigate the tests and the trials that he leads us into when we follow him in order to build our character and to prepare us for roles in eternity. When we follow God, he will lead us into trials and tribulations. He leads us there. Why? Why does a loving Father do that? Because he wants to train us. He wants to train us. Would we send troops into the battle without taking them first through rigorous training? Of course not. That would be foolish. That would be suicidal. God's going to train us. Jesus leads us into glory by tasting death for us, freeing us from the enemy's traps, suffering our just consequences, and helping us when we are tested. Now, what do all of these things have in common? What do all these things that Jesus does for us have in common? If we think about it, they are all preemptive measures. They are all counterattacks, if you will, to the ways that the enemy tries to kill, steal, and destroy our lives. This is spiritual warfare. The enemy wants to convince us to reject God so that death is permanent, because then he doesn't have to worry about us anymore. But Jesus has tasted death for us and invites us to join him in a new eternal life. Counterattack. The enemy uses fear to trap us and scare us away from God's preferred future. But Jesus has conquered fear and encourages us down the road less traveled. Counterattack. The enemy twists the ways we've fallen short of or missed our target that God has given us. And he does this to condemn us, to slander us with all sorts of lies about how bad we are, how worthless, how hypocritical, what failures we are. But Jesus offers to pay our debts, to make up for the ways that we've fallen short, to forgive us for violating God's commands. Again, counterattack. The enemy wants to distort our trials and our tests, to convince us that God is angry with us, that he's punishing us, that he's abandoning or rejecting us. The enemy wants to lie to us about our trials and tribulations to separate us from God and ruin our relationships with God and with others. But Jesus offers us help when we're tested. Counterattack. He offers to join us in our testing so that it has the intended positive outcomes for us and for our character. So in each of these four ways, Jesus leads us into glory by providing a pathway for us to overcome the enemy and all of the ways that the enemy tries to separate us from God and from our rightful glory. So back to the minefield example. The enemy has laid all of these mines out in front of us. And Jesus says, I want you to go right through that minefield. And I'm going to be there. I'm going to go first. And if you will follow me, if you will listen to me, I'm going to tell you where all the mines are. And I'm going to help you navigate them. And you'll be scared along the way. But if you lean on me, my perfect love will conquer that fear. So God is with us as Jesus leads us into the glory that the Father created us for, and to ensure that we assume our rightful places in his redeemed creation, the new heaven and the new earth that he established for us. Jesus came to be with us to lead us into the promised land, just like Moses did with the Israelites. And he leads us through, over, and around the pitfalls and roadblocks and attacks the enemy throws at us so that we don't enter the promised land. Now, the choice we have is really simple. Not easy, but simple. Are we going to follow Jesus? Are we going to follow his lead? Where are you struggling today with where and how Jesus is leading you? I struggled with this so much. I would know that Jesus was leading me in a certain direction. I would be 100% convinced that that is the way that I'm supposed to go. And it would be confirmed by all of the guys that I have around me and the counselors and so on and so forth. And so I'd be totally 100% convinced that that is the direction that I needed to go. And then I would struggle with every step along the way. And I would doubt and I would harumph and I was like, but I'm sure this is the direction I'm going to go. So why is all this stuff happening? So where do you have to decide again to follow him through it? Where do you have to decide not to quit? Because if you're in the middle of it, Jesus is right there in front of you, leading you through it. So what we've talked about so far today, and what I've chosen to emphasize, is our individual path with Jesus. Our individual relationship with God and his individual plans and purposes for each of us. And those are very important. But one of the ways that our American culture and our worship in American culture of rugged individualism has seeped into church culture and distorted our views of God's plans and purposes is that we tend to emphasize our personal redemption and our personal relationship with Jesus at the exclusion of the collective one. Okay? So in other words, we tend to forget that the Bible predominantly emphasizes our collective path to salvation, or God's collective plans and purposes for us. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about communism. Okay? I'm not talking about socialism. Okay? I'm just simply saying that we as Americans, it is rooted in our culture from the very beginning, from the Declaration of Independence on, that we are individuals first. Not every culture is like that. You go to other cultures in the world, and they teach from day one that the family, that the collection, that the community, that the village is more important than you individually. That is not our culture. Our culture teaches that the individual is more important. So we read that into the Bible. There's no way for us not to. So the church in the West, we've emphasized that. The problem is that the Bible doesn't emphasize that. It's actually balanced. So what I'm saying, I'm not talking about communism. I'm simply talking about emphasizing what the Bible emphasizes, emphasizing the collective redemption. Think about it. The Old Testament is the story of God's relationship with his people, Israel, pointing us toward the promised future leader, Jesus. Now, we focus on many Old Testament individuals, many leaders such as Abraham, Moses, Noah, individuals in the collective story of God's people. Likewise, the New Testament. It's the story of the redemption of God's relationship with his people through Jesus, the fulfillment of the Old Testament promises. The New Testament is about the establishment of God's church. Again, a collection of people. It's about God creating his new family. What Jesus refers to as his body, the body of Christ. Look again on page 2 of your handout as you scan down those verses in Hebrews. We're referred to as God's children, plural. Jesus' brothers and sisters, plural. The descendants of Abraham, plural. And that Jesus takes away the sins of the people. Our, we, us. That's the story of the entire Bible. God calling, redeeming, and sending his people. Individually, yes, we all have to have that individual relationship with Jesus. We all have our individual paths to walk. But more importantly, collectively. Collectively. Hebrews 2:16 says it like this: we also know that the Son did not come to help angels, he came to help the descendants of Abraham. Have you ever thought about that? God's plan of redemption of his creation does not include the redemption of the fallen angels who joined Satan in rebellion against God. They don't get another opportunity. But we do. Why? We must be pretty special. He doesn't give the angels another chance. So just like we humans had a special place in God's creation, we have a very special place in God's redemption of that creation. The new heaven, the new earth. That is something he's invited all of us collectively to participate in. In fact, he's commanded us to participate in. It's like in Hollywood when they have the cattle call, right? Anyone can come, but they're only going to choose one or two. That's not what Jesus does. Jesus has a cattle call, and then he says, if you'll follow me, you can all come in. Everybody would want to be an actor. The question is, will we participate? Will you participate? Will I participate? Or will I ride off into the sunset like the Lone Ranger? That's what our culture wants us to do, right? The outlaw Josie Wales, the Lone Ranger, off into the sunset. Solo. I'm going to do it myself. That's not the Bible. The concept of our collective redemption is really important. It's really important in 2016, the year of going deep and wide. And we're going to close with this today, and this is point 3 in your notes. God is with us to pioneer a new way of living. Living with eternity in mind. That's how Jesus lived. He was able to endure what was before him because he was living with eternity in mind. Even though he was human. Living by trying to expand God's eternal family. He knew that if he went to the cross, if he completed his mission, that would enable his word to be written so that everybody had access to it. He knew that if he completed his mission, that because it had been promised, the Holy Spirit would be released, the third person of the God family would be released, and then everybody would have access at all times. So he said, I'm willing to pay the price now so that everybody benefits later. That was how he led us. Everybody benefits later if I pay the price now. Our culture, we teach, I will benefit later by paying the price now, right? No pain, no gain. But that's not what Jesus was doing. Living with eternity in mind. That's what missional living is all about. Living as if we already were in eternity. So think about this. How would you live? Who would you reach if you fully embraced the 4 realities that we've talked about today? If I fully embraced that Jesus had completely tasted death for us so that we needn't fear death or anything else for that matter. That Jesus had completely freed us from the enemy's traps, so we never need to fall prey to those traps. That Jesus had suffered for all of our deserved and just consequences, so that we were never held back. And that Jesus always helped us when we were tested, so that we could persevere through any testing whatsoever. What would CV Church look like? What would the Crescenta Valley look like if just the people in this room started living with the belief that those 4 things had already been done? I think that would look a little bit like heaven on earth. I would argue even that any time you see an act of God, when you see, this happens to me, maybe I'm the only one, I can't be the only one, where I see something and I recognize God. And often I will see it in a secular setting. And it will be so powerful that I will just start weeping. There's something about my spirit that just in that moment, God just says, that's me. But we just get a glimpse of it, right? Here on earth. It's just a moment. For me, it happens a lot in sporting events. I don't know why. Right? The U.S. women's soccer team wins a gold medal. I see them running around. And I don't care about soccer. And I just start bawling. I see a replay of the YouTube clip of the 1980 U.S. hockey team. And I hear Al Michaels. Do you believe in miracles? And I just start bawling. Now that, I'm a sports guy, so that happens. For you, it might be you turn on the TV and there's terms of endearment and you just start. That happens to me too, actually. But God is showing us a glimpse. It could be a piece of Mozart. It could be a Monet. It could be a great movie. It could be a little baby. Whatever it is for you that stirs up that joy, that emotive joy, okay, that's God giving you a little glimpse. And what do we say when we experience that glimpse? We say, I'm overwhelmed. A little bit like heaven on earth if we believed in those 4 things. In Hebrews 12:1, the author urges us, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. Now, this is what we're going to be learning in 2016 during our year-long small group journey through the missional essentials. So in your bulletin, there is a deep and wide handout. In those small groups, in those missional families, we're going to be learning to live with eternity in mind and learning how to bring as many of God's family with us as possible. It will be the grandest of grand adventures. Star Wars will pale in comparison. So if you're interested in being a host, which just means you have a home or a place, apartment, whatever, and you want to open your home to host a small group, that's what being a host is. Facilitator doesn't mean you have to be a Bible teacher. You have the workbook and you guide the people through it. That's all it is. You facilitate. Keep the group on track. So if you're interested in that, put your name on that and put it in the plates or in the boxes in the foyer. And if you'll notice, we've been talking about this since Vision Day. And lately it's been brought to my attention that people just realize that this is a year long. And everybody's like, well, what happened to 40 days? Well, it's a year long. Why is it a year long, Scott? I don't know. Because that's how long it takes. That's how long it takes. Okay? The American dream is so deeply rooted in who we are in America that to unlearn that takes a year. It takes more than a year. I've been studying this stuff and trying to apply it to my life for 3 years, and I'm just starting to get it. I'm just starting to get it. That's how tightly we cling to the American dream, right? That's our ship in the harbor. If I just make enough money, I can take care of my family, I can take care of my kids, I can get them to the right schools, I can get them in the right college, and they're going to be set, and then I'll be set. That's the American dream, right? So I'm not talking about communism. I'm just talking about letting go of it. Saying, you know what? What if I told my employer, and I know this is hard, and this might not be the same for everybody, what if I told my employer, you know what, I'm going to take this extra time because I'm going to lead this small group. And Lord, I'm going to trust you that I'm going to have favor with my employer. Because I know most of you are so good at what you do. God has given you such favor that your employer would be like, great, I'll support you in that. But how many of us are afraid to ask? I get it. I'm afraid to ask all the time. I'm afraid. I'm holding on to it. Right? So God wants us just to let go of the American dream. Now, what would that look like? Well, maybe I don't have the biggest house. Well, maybe God's given me a big house so I can host a bigger small group. God is inviting us to let go of the American dream, which means simply living for myself, getting as much as I can for myself, and embracing God's dream, which means living for all of us collectively, relating to our brothers and sisters who aren't in this room, and inviting them to be with us. So the grand narrative in the Bible, it's God creating and redeeming His creation through His people, collectively leading them into eternity. Earlier today we read, and I promised you I would talk about glory. Hebrews 2:10, God, for whom and through whom everything was made, chose to bring many children into glory. But what is glory? Glory is eternity. It's immortality. It's life with God and with others in rich relationship with genuine purpose, no pain, glorious because God manifests His presence in a most unspeakably awe-inspiring manner. And because there, all of His people, His saints, are rendered unspeakably awe-inspiring as well. In the glory of eternity, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord of all. There will be no debate. God's family will no longer reject Him. All will have chosen glory, eternity with Him. No conflict, no death. All of the 4 things we talked about that God does for us now to overcome the enemy, those things will be completed, fulfilled, done. I'm going to go sci-fi on you. Jesus is the first of a race of immortal humans. I'm saying that with a straight face. It sounds like a superhero movie, but it's not. It's the climax of God's story. Jesus came in order to model for us how intently and how intensely He is with us, for us, and one of us. He accepted the limitations of being human, of being restricted to knowing only the recent past and the present. Right? That's our human condition. We can read about the past, but we only know of our own experience the fairly recent past, and the present. We're restricted. Physically, we can only be in one place at one time. I have teenagers. I know I can't be with both of them at the same time. So these limitations meant that he had to learn trust, humility, waiting from the things that he suffered. Jesus accepted those limitations, time, space, for 33 years, just like you and I and all of our human brothers and sisters. And he did that so that he could live for eternity as the first immortal human. Now, not only did he receive the glory of eternity, he also modeled this for the small group of people who were memorialized in Scripture. His word that lives forever. And then he released the Holy Spirit, which empowers every believer and every relationship, every interaction happening billions of times all over the planet every day where two or more are gathered in Jesus' name. So by accepting these limitations for 33 years and suffering with those limitations, Jesus entered into his glory, and he invites us to follow him there. And he invites us to follow him into a place where those limitations don't exist. So the question for us is, are you, am I, are we going to follow him there? Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for leading us into eternity. Lord, when you've phrased it that way to me this week, I thought, how could I ever doubt you? How could I ever say no to that? So Lord, I just pray for everyone here today, Lord, that you would speak to them in a new way. You would speak to them in a fresh way. That when we see a Christmas tree, or we see a nativity scene, or we hear a Hark the Herald Angels, or a Little Drummer Boy, or the Justin Bieber version of whatever song, that we remember you, and that you are leading us into eternity, that you're calling us to join you in eternity, that you're calling us to then, as you lead us lead as many as we possibly can, that the way the Father gave you influence over us, he gives us influence over others, with others. As we relate to them, he gives us influence, so that when we invite them into our homes in 2016 for Deep and Wide, they won't come because they want to come to church, Lord. They will come because they will want to relate to us, because they want to relate to you. So Lord, just forgive us for practicing Christianity without Jesus. We do it all the time, Lord. And Lord, I just pray that you continue to go deep in us and encourage us, push us to go wide, so that we can introduce others to you. And that you can lead all of us collectively into your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks for watching the message. You can find more information at cvchurch.com.